Welcome to the Business Wingman Show. I'm Steve Smith. I'm in studio here with my co-host Travis Smith. And today we're going to talk about a different kind of topic. Most of the times our episodes are filled with how to handle this problem, how to deal with that situation, what to do if you find yourself in some type of a challenge or a mess or something like that. It's all good stuff. But today I thought we'd talk a little bit about inspiration. What inspires you? What causes you to feel so good about something that you engage with somebody else in or see from some other direction that you're inspired to act, to do things that you normally wouldn't do because you've got that rush going on. It's I don't think you hear a lot about it in the media today. I mean, we just get bombarded with negative messaging 24/7. And a lot of times it's just great to be able to sit back and say, there's a positive side to all this. You just got to go out and look for it. So Travis, when you think of inspiration, what comes to mind for you?
Well, the funny thing is, when you proposed this topic, where I went immediately was I don't want to use the word fake, but this idea that people think, when someone asks what inspires you, have you ever felt like people have to give you this corporate answer? It's this answer that everyone else wants, quote unquote, wants to hear,
Right.
right? It feels, it's like I want to I want to rid the world of disease. I want to
Right.
clean the world. It's this giant nebulous idea that's
Right.
supposed to make everybody feel great.
Right. It,
But the
it it
real,
lacks any personal authenticity.
yeah,
Right.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
But I think the reality for most people is what inspires them are really just more basic things. And for example, I have a family. I have two kids. What inspires me is being able to provide for those children and give us a lifestyle that allows us to be able to take advantage of certain things like going on trips and stuff like that.
Right.
Uh, you know,
Right.
it's it's not grandiose. It's kind of basic, right?
Yeah, but I mean, by the same token, I also think that one of the elements of inspiration is it's out there. There's you could walk out in front of your house and stand in the street and turn in six different directions. And if you follow that direction,
Right.
you'll run into something inspirational. But it's basically you have to decide that I want to look for inspiration. I want to be inspired as opposed to holding up in your office or your basement or wherever you spend most of your time thinking that it's going to come knocking on your door. Now, it doesn't mean that doesn't happen. I just don't think that's the preponderance of it.
Well, I'll give you a good example of something that I experienced many years ago, and still today it inspires me to operate a certain way,
Right.
more from a behavioral standpoint. I've talked about this book. I couldn't even tell you how many times I've talked about this book on this podcast. I mean, a dozen or two. Um, it's a book that's called The Go-Giver by I think Bob Berg. Maybe don't hold me accountable to that, but the general idea of this book is it's a mindset and a way of operating where you are interacting with people not for the purpose of getting, but
Hmm.
for the purpose of giving, go
Hmm.
giver, right?
Right.
And helping them get to where they need to be, right?
Hmm.
So, what that would look like in real life would be, let's say I'm out looking for a job. Rather than everybody I interact with, I'm trying to get, which is who can you get me in front of? Who can you connect me with? What jobs do you know about, right? That's a lot of, you're taking.
Right.
It's how can I help you? What business opportunities are you looking for? What people do you need to get connected with, right?
Right.
What issues are you dealing with that maybe I can make a connection for you? And the funny thing is, by operating that way and leading that way, what you find is that people then are inspired to want to help you in your pursuits,
Right.
right?
And I would also say that running into people who are willing to extend some help to you, that whole idea of generosity is inspiring in and of itself. Because, if you don't stay connected with people throughout the day and the week, and you just stay tuned into social media and other forms of media channels, you can very quickly get the idea that nobody cares. Everybody's too busy, banging their drum or screaming about something they don't like. And sometimes you have to just get out amongst regular everyday folks and experience what it's like for other people to just out of their own desire to, like you said, to help, to be willing to engage in something that might benefit you.
I think you hit the nail on the head with that. If we stay in front of our computers or our cell phones, which a lot of us do, I will candidly admit,
Right.
I have to sometimes pull myself away from that. But the challenge though is you're just inundated with content, and to your point, a fair amount of that content is not necessarily representative of a good world,
Yeah, I
right?
think the sourcing of it comes from a minute sector, but it has a big audience. It has a big platform. And so it appears to a lot of people like everybody is thinking this way or doing this stuff or buckling under the hardship
Right.
of whatever people are talking about.
Well, and for that point, if you just get outside and interact with people, what you find is that most people are pretty congenial. They're pretty, I don't, joyful might be a little bit of a stretch, but they're pleasant.
Hmm.
I had an experience a couple days ago where I was walking out of a store and there was a man that was maybe, I don't know, 20, 25 feet behind me. I held the door open for him. Didn't really think anything of it, just kind of held the door open. When he got up to me and came through, he looked me right in the eyes and said, "Hey, I really appreciate you today." And it
Yeah,
was funny. And it was funny because I didn't necessarily do it for that impact.
right,
I just thought it was kind of the polite, right thing to do in that
right,
moment, you
right.
know. But you don't get those kind of interactions if you're in front of your computer online or on social media all day long.
Yes. And you know what? That's a really good point because I think in the majority of cases, I mean, inspiration can come from a lot of sources, but I think a disproportion of it, a number of them come from other people who are engaging in noble ventures and good acts. And I think we all tend to look at that and say, you know what? I can do that, or I can do something like that in my own world. And so you now start thinking beyond your own schedule for the day to figure out what can you do to uplift somebody else around you.
So I have a random example I'm going to give you here of somebody who I don't know, but watching a couple videos of this person online, I have to admit, I have found this person to be really inspiring.
Hmm.
Are you familiar? Have you seen any of the videos of this guy online, the president of Argentina? His name's Javier Milei.
I've heard the name and I know, I think he's done some things down there that are pretty uplifting, but I don't know him in that much depth.
I mean, first and foremost, if you see the guy's hair, it's fantastic. And that's coming from somebody who doesn't have hair.
Right.
I'm really inspired by his hair. But in a more serious note, what this guy's doing with that country is absolutely remarkable. And he just got into office, I think, towards the end of 2023.
Yes.
That country had inflation that was so bad, it was predicted if it didn't change, which I'll get to that in a moment, but it was predicted it would hit 17,000%.
Oh my God. That
That that
sounds like
was
Zimbabwe a number
that,
of
that
years ago.
wasn't 17. That was 17 with three zeros behind it,
Right, right.
right? So basically, what that means is the country completely collapses. But in a period of, I think, about 9 or 10 months, and this guy's, he's kind of a firebrand. He does things that are a little wild. Like, for example, when he was campaigning, he was walking around with a chainsaw. But
Hmm.
it was a visual representation of the need to cut things up in the country, right? But anyways, you watch a couple of this guy's videos and he's just different. And I'm not saying he's different and good because of his party lines. It's how he's operating and how
Hmm.
he sees things.
Right.
And I don't know, I just find that inspirational. It's like, even when you're down on your luck and you're looking at a point in which things are really bad. I mean, 17,000% inflation, that's really freaking bad.
Right.
There's always an opportunity to come back from that,
Okay,
right?
so what I'm taking away from that example, and we have examples in this country today that kind of fall in line with that is you have a gentleman who has reached a certain level of, power, authority. Um, he recognizes that there are problems that just need to get fixed.
Right.
And he's just going to go about fixing them. He's not going to worry about all of the backlash or the other people poo-pooing him on,
Right.
Instagram. And he's
Right.
he's not worried about any of that. He's just saying, look, this is a problem and somebody needs to fix it, and I'm here, so I'm going to do it. And I think that is really inspirational to me to see somebody who's willing to take action in view of any possible backlash that could happen to them because they recognize that something needs to get done. And if you just look at it for what it is and just make the right decision, you're probably going to be better off than not.
Yeah, I think if, a lot of times perhaps where maybe we get misled with inspiration is we look at people who, I'm not saying they're bad people, but are they of themselves really making a change? And for example, the typical stuff you hear is um, athletes, pro athletes, right? And how perhaps younger generations look up to these folks,
Hmm.
right? But the reality is, and I'm certainly not taking away their athleticism or the fact that they work their butts off to get to that point,
Right.
but are we perhaps misplacing that inspiration and looking up to these folks, right? When there are so many other people and perhaps just average regular people, right,
Right.
that are doing amazing things that our time would be better suited looking at, kind of following those stories, right?
Yes.
And one of the things that I don't know, maybe it's just because I'm not a part of that generation, but a challenge I see with younger folks, and when I mean younger folks, like kind of 30s and into their 20s, is, there's this idea that if they're not changing the world and they're not inspired to change the world, that they're not doing good, right?
Right.
I find that a little interesting because that's kind of heady. How realistic is it that every one of us is going to change the world or every little thing that we're doing? And so I have found it helpful to find moments of inspiration in just regular things. It doesn't need to be something that's completely changing the world. And I brought up my children earlier. Seeing them do certain things, like for example, my younger daughter when she learned how to swim.
Hmm.
I mean, where we started off in that experience, I mean, I was like pretty sure she's going to drown at any moment, you know? And then for her to transition from that to jumping off this ledge into a pool, and the ledge is whatever it is, 3, 4 feet up, and she's just having a ball. It's something so small like that.
Right.
But for me, that's really inspiring to see that growth in her and the courage that comes out of that, right?
Well, look, anytime you can be a part of helping someone else overcome a limitation. I mean, that limitation could just be unfamiliarity, it could be full-blown fear, something in between. But if there's something that you participate in or something you say that helps somebody push through and eventually be able to do things that they previously thought they weren't capable or anything of, I mean, that's very personally inspirational. Um, when I first started this business, back in 2008, I actually bought into a small franchise coaching company. And it was a great time. I mean, learned a lot of new things, was in a completely different atmosphere than I was my prior 30 years. Ultimately, the company didn't survive, but it propelled me to where I am today. So I always look back at those early times, kind of fondly. And they were really big with certain sayings and certain things like that. And because a lot of it was mindset, if you're going to pursue your true potential, be at the top of your game, your head's got to be there first. The head can't be the last thing that shows up. And so they would always talk about little things you could do to kind of inspire and motivate yourself. And one of the things that they talked about was, and this was really amazing. I tell a lot of my clients this who are kind of always, down in the dumps about issues they don't feel like they can resolve. And it goes like this. Every day before 12 noon, find someone to thank. You go to your coffee shop in the morning, somebody makes your latte of choice, tell them that you appreciate the fact that they do great work. Be generous and be, thankful to somebody. Doesn't matter who they are. Dry cleaner, person you see every day in the grocery store, colleague, but just do it before noon. Make that commitment that some point early in the day. And why before noon? Because if you do it early in the day, it has legs on it. It stays with you. It kind of propels you through the afternoon doldrums and some of the end of the day crap that you don't see coming. It just sets you up for having a better view of what's going on around you.
I absolutely love that. I mean, the idea that putting gratitude out in the world, right? And what that does for other people who
Right,
receive it, and how important that is because, what I take away from what you just said is the intentionality that comes from that behavior,
right.
you know? And
Yes,
I think the bigger thing here is, we're not doing this to be fake, right? It's one, you get something out of it, right? But then the receiver also gets something out of it.
sure.
So you're kind of spreading that good word, for what it's worth.
Right.
Um, and it's interesting that you brought that up. About a year ago, through the church that our family goes to, I participated in this kind of group exercise that went on for about 2 weeks, give or take. And that was one of the things they had us doing was it. So it's really interesting that you said before lunch, because that was a part of this kind of exercise, if you will, is to put good out into the world
Hmm.
before lunch. So
Yeah,
it could be something as small as randomly sending somebody a text message and just saying, "Hey, it's been a long time. I was thinking about you. Just really hope you have a great day." Something like that,
right,
right? It could be the example I had shared earlier of going out of your way to open a door for someone, right?
right.
Um, but putting good out in the world. And the funny thing is how that changes your mindset for the day, right? Even if it's been a rough week, doing something for somebody else without the expectation of getting something in return is a really powerful mindset and behavioral trait.
It is, and I think the other thing that's kind of interesting to watch is if you make a regular, and you don't have to be doing this every hour of the day, but just making a regular occurrence of showing kindness or support or some type of acknowledgement to something somebody else is doing. What's really interesting is just to sit back and watch the responses that you get. And what you realize really quickly is the vast majority of people that are walking around that you might directly or indirectly interact with they don't see this stuff hardly ever. So when it shows up, it's almost a surprise. And sometimes, depending on the situation you're in, sometimes people can almost back up, almost like, what are you doing here? Like humans aren't supposed to be nice.
Right,
So you're
right.
showing up nice, that must mean there's a problem. So you do have to kind of get used to folks that maybe don't recognize it for its true intention. But by the same token, I think it's really interesting to see people respond to that, and many times respond out of some type of elation that somebody else in their world recognized what they're trying to do to make their own orbit a little nicer to live in.
But I think that goes back to the intentionality of it, right?
Right.
How easy is it for us to wake up day in and day out, almost kind of like we're on the hamster wheel, and not really think about these things, but yet we can talk about how rough life has been or how tough our job is, or you know the funny thing though is if we're intentional about trying to change that, what you'll find is that it almost kind of removes that cloud, that rain cloud over you, because you're seeking positive experiences or offering them to other people,
Right.
which then brings that back your way, which is also inspiring.
All right. So the reason that this topic today and just knowing and kind of trying to kind of follow this on a regular basis was important enough to bring up is because I have always been of the thought process, and you hear a lot of people talk about this, especially at work and in other areas where there's some degree of performance that needs to take place or some other competitive factor that needs to be overcome. People in leadership roles tend to talk a lot about motivating their teams, get people motivated. I personally don't believe that it's my job to motivate you
Hmm.
because I think motivation comes from within. You have to motivate yourself. What I can do to bring about that feeling of getting motivated is inspiration. If I tell a story or relay an experience or give some sense to somebody else that they really have the ability to do what they think they can't do, and they start to think about it and it starts to make sense to them, they will motivate themselves to take action, whatever that action looks like. But it's not because I'm telling them you got to go out and do this, do that. Sure, that works in some situations in a very short time frame, but it doesn't stick. So if you find yourself having to motivate your crew at work every single day, then you're doing them a disservice because you're basically enabling them not to think for themselves and not to try to kind of reason through stuff and figure out what you're capable of. So I think the inspiration side does a much better job of helping people drive their own initiative.
And I'm so glad you bring this up because it's kind of like the mindset of positivity, right? It's
Mhm.
no one else is responsible for driving that for you but yourself,
Right,
right? So when you think about inspiration, which is our topic today, I'm so glad you brought that up because we ourselves are solely responsible for how we show up and how we choose to operate.
right,
That's a choice. So if we want to choose to be an asshole, you're making that choice,
right,
right?
right.
Versus if you want to choose to show up positively, and have that rub off on other people and seek those moments. Again, that's a choice.
Well, so that's one of the things that I cringe a little bit about. I don't make a big deal of it, but it does make me wince just a tad when I hear people say, "I want you to be happy." You know, happy. I can't make you be happy. You have to be happy for yourself. I can inspire you to make you start to look at the more positive sides of your existence and develop a sense of contentment and happiness from that. But there's nothing I can do to make you happy. But yet that seems to be at least vocalized by many, many people, especially the loved ones, they just want you to be happy. Well, that's good. I mean, happiness is something everybody should try to pursue and have at some amount in their life. But I don't think that's something that's transferable. I think I can do things that inspire you to find happiness in your own life.
Well, but I think a part of that is it's a lot easier to blame our circumstances on other people than our own actions,
Right.
right? So I think that's ultimately what ends up happening is that it's not that people don't want to be happy, but their circumstances or their experiences kind of take hold, right? And it's very difficult to change that.
Right.
Intact. So I'm curious. Can you think of anything that you've experienced in your life where you were inspired by something that was unexpected?
Oh, that's a good question. An unexpected moment of inspiration. Um, I can tell you generally what I think does that for me, and it's seeing people who appear to not have all the advantages of life succeed.
Hmm.
I'll tell you a movie that was very inspirational, and there's been many inspirational movies out there, but one I can remember is this one called Rudy. It's an old movie. God, I
That's a
don't know
great
when it
movie.
came out in the 80s or something. I mean, it's been a long, long, long time. But all this kid wanted to be able to do was be a player, a football player on the on Notre Dame's team. That was his life dream to be on that team. And he went through a lot of adversity and a lot of pushback and a lot of rejection. And, he finally made it on the team as like a towel boy, kind of a runner of equipment and stuff. And the end of the movie, so even if you haven't seen it, I'm going to throw it out anyway. But the end of the
Spoiler
movie,
alert.
he gets the opportunity to suit up. And for a couple a couple of plays at the end of a game, which his parents had come to, he got to play. And that basically was it for him. I mean, he had reached his milestone because that's all he ever wanted to do. That was such an inspirational movie. I mean, if you guys haven't seen that, you should go out on Netflix and find it and watch it because it really does make you think about, gee, what am I allowing in my daily routine to get in my way and cause me to stop?
And I think that takeaway of what am I allowing to get in front of me to allow me to make excuses, right? We all do that.
Right,
And I think that's, my hope for people who are listening today is the takeaway here is inspiration doesn't have to come in the form of this giant nebulous idea. And when I say nebulous, what I'm talking about is like larger than life. It's like as
right,
big as the universe, right?
right.
It can be, like you've said earlier, small acts of kindness, intentional acts of kindness, right? It can be witnessing somebody else achieve something great, right? And then seeing that helps you in your own life. Uh,
Yeah, and I really believe that it's one of these things where once you start to realize the emotional and psychological benefits of being inspired, hopefully you'll go out on a daily basis and look for it or give it to someone else. You know, it's that old saying, help me help you kind of thing.
right.
You know, instead of doing the woe is me or immediately diving into everybody else's online crap, figure out how to elevate someone else so that the things that they respond to can be some measure to you that, hey, life isn't that bad. Life's actually pretty good. It's better to be on this side of the turf, you know?
Well, but again, I think that, easier said than done when things are going the right way,
Right.
right? Uh,
But you
but
know
that's
what?
why,
Life over time, and the longer you live it, the more you get to kind of look back at it and just recognize the magnitude of things that you thought were massive deal breakers and how maybe they weren't, in the grand scheme of things. And I think that element of wisdom kind of helps people recognize that life is just it's a process of handling the unexpected that hits you. And the more you get comfortable with that and recognizing that there is life on the other side, if you just step back, seek out some inspiration, and develop a clear enough head to be able to say, for me, this is the right thing to do, I think most people would be served really well.
I don't have anything else to add after that. I mean, you just Yoda'd us.
Yeah, I know. Problem. I get it. All right, folks, listen, if this touched you today, what I would ask you to do is act on it. Go out and just find some situation that you can add to inspire someone else. And here's the interesting thing, and I've gotten this feedback on occasion. Sometimes the inspiration other people get from your good acts, your selfless acts, the things that you do for the benefit of others, don't immediately come to your awareness. Sometimes it's days or weeks later that you find out that something positive happened as a result of some good deed that you did in the moment. So don't be discouraged if you don't get the immediate feedback. Just keep on the path because eventually it will come back to you. And usually, when it comes back in a delayed fashion, somebody has built upon it. And now they're in a much better place, either mental place or psychological or economic or health or whatever the case may be. But it's definitely the long game. But in the short run, I think if you initiate it, you look for it, you practice it, I think you'll get way more out of it than you think you should. So with that, thanks for being here today. As always, we come back every Tuesday, 4 o'clock Pacific Standard Time with new material. So we invite you to stay with us. Show up next week. We'll have another great idea and a topic to discuss. And until then, live your best life. Travis, great topic. We'll talk to you later.